Richard Goddard took some of us to see the fort vault. He'd come across it as a boy in his junior school at Lodge on cross country runs. Told us that there was a prefect that used to give him trouble and picked up a bone in the vault and threatened to put it on him. The prefect was terrified. Needless to say, Richard owned the prefect from then. What follows is some images of the vault and some explanations of Haynes Hill, where it is located. Enjoy. We're now going to start on a clean sheet on a new map, 1722 map. We're looking at Samuel Forte, F-O-R-T or F-O-R-T-E. He's at Haynes Hill now. Sweet has died, and in 1697, Forte ends up buying part of the plantation and ultimately all the plantation. He builds a house and a vault. I suspect the stone for the house came from the quarry in which the vault is built. It's actually cut into the rock. It's quite a remarkable piece of construction. But we're starting a new sheet and we're looking at Forte. He died in 1711, which is 31 years on from 1680 that we've been looking at so far. So we can deal with him and his children, Generation 2 and Generation 3. We have a new map to deal with as background. And we'll do the same sort of exercise as we did with the 1675/80 map Ford. So let's get started and go and look at the vault. That's really an interesting exercise. Richard Goddard, Collins in hand, took a group of us to look at the Fort Vault. Probably 2010, 2009, somewhere in that time frame. So we beat a track and we finally found it. Here is the entrance to the Fort Vault. Small marble, I wouldn't say tablet, it's probably a plaque that is here. Here's the entrance. It's open. Here's Richard. So let's see what's inside. Closer view of the tablet. Plaque shows that within this vault are interred the remains of Samuel Forte, gentleman, obit 1711. So he died in 1711. And his wife Ursula, obit 1700. It looks like 1700. Yes, somebody's been monkeying with it, but it looks like 1700. But we can check that. And many members of the Forte family. Here's what the vault looks like from the outside looking in. A little bit foreboding. We enter the vault. This is the entrance here. One guy looks a little bit nervous. I think he did come in though. But this is what the vault looks like. It's a huge room cut. It's actually carved into the rock face. The vaulted ceiling you would have to see the workmanship to realize how beautifully done this was. But there are no coffins. Somebody moved all the coffins. Looks like a couple of bones here, possibly a rib bone down at the bottom, floating rib. I don't know. Not a doctor. I don't know what that is or that. But these two look definitely very much like rib bones. So there were probably people buried in here, and these are some of the remains. This is the view from the outside, and that's the sign to Haynes Hill. This is the St. John's Parish Register. Burials in 1700 when Ursula Forte was interred in the fort vault. If you look down the list, you'll find that that happened, or at least she was buried on the, let's say, 17th April, perhaps, May, July, September, 17th of September. Not always so clear, these registers. 17th of September. As to what happened, if she was involved in it or whatever, because if you look at the next burial, there's Mary, wife of Major Thomas Rouse, involved in St. Philip. Would be the Rouse family, which married into George Fox's family. So it is possible this is a brother of John Rouse, who married Margaret Fell, the stepdaughter of George Fox. John Rouse was a Quaker itinerant, went to Boston to try and spread the Quakers' beliefs. He went to evangelize the Puritans. That's what he went to do. But the Puritans reacted by, I think, he must have been there 3 times, because I think third time he went there, the he got his ear cut off. That was the punishment at the time. So if you look down here, you'll see more burials. Here's another Rouse burial. Anthony, son of John Rouse. Could be the John Rouse I just mentioned. 1701, and so on. Now let's go to 1711 and look for Samuel Rouse. Does not appear in this list. Nothing. You can see some names here, like we met the Weston family on top of the cliff above Foster Hall. So let us go forward now. Look to 1712 and see what happens. So we're going to look at 1712. Let's see. Mr. Samuel Forte, April the 27th. Wait, this is weird. How does the vault say he's interned in 1711 and the parish record says he's interned in 1712? Or yeah, one explanation might be that he was interred without the Church of England, St. John's Parish, knowing. They came to know of it and then entered his burial in the register. That's one explanation. Who knows? It's always a mystery. Not a lot of people seem to be dying back there in a year. And I think the reason is that not a lot of people were recorded because a lot of them were buried outside of the church in Quaker burying grounds and so on. So that probably explains why there are not so many and why the discrepancy of the date. This is an article I got from Richard Goddard when we were exploring the vault at Haynes Hill, the Fort Vault. I would have got that probably in 2009. There is a picture of what the house at and mill at Haynes Hill looked like in the time of the author's husband's early life. He was born at Haynes Hill in 1902 and spent his early life there. So if you look at it, you can see there's a very substantial house. Where did they get the block stone to build it? That might tell us when it was built. In fact, I think it does. It came from a quarry nearby in which the vault is dug out of the rock face. We know, we'll see, we'll get the dating on that later on, but let's look at this yard. Here's the mill. It's huge, it's imposing, it's monstrous. Looks like it could do a lot of work. But if you look closely, you'll realize that energy is converted from the wind to rotational energy. The rotational energy drives a horizontal shaft, so there's loss on the bearings in the bearings of the shaft. The horizontal rotation is converted to vertical rotation at the crown wheel. There's more energy loss there, and the vertical rotation is converted back to horizontal rotation. This mill looks like it is a horizontal mill. So you got three sources of energy loss there right away. Colin Hudson used to tell me that windmills probably cover 3 to 4 horsepower, which is a small lawnmower. So some cane grinding mills you can get off the internet that are run by a small engine, Briggs and Stratton probably. They could probably do the same amount of work this monster could. But that's to do with technology and advancements in science. So this mill is not going to mill a lot of cane. In fact, you can work out how much sugar was produced by this mill in the 17th and 1800s, 16th and 17th and 18th centuries. Just if you knew how much sugar was produced. You know, typically in that time, output tonnages were from 10,000 to 20,000 tons of sugar. On Mayo, there are about 500 plus mills shown. So this mill, or one like it, could produce probably 20 to 40 tons of sugar. Now, this might be in a better mill than a lot of the others, so it might produce a bit more. There would be some that may have been a bit better than this. So that's just an average number. So what happens in the 17th and 18th century with sugar is its output is capped by the milling capacity. It's constant, it's steady. We don't have rivers to drive water wheels like they did in Suriname and then later in Guyana and Trinidad. We got to rely on wind in the absence of steam or fossil fuel. So we really are limited. So the story about how the output of sugar rose dramatically during the 1600s. You have to listen to those stories uh, with mind's eye on the limitations of the output of the mills. I think it would probably be right to say that the land, more and more of the land was taken up in agriculture. But if it was all planted in sugar, the mills could never mill it. So it's only a small fraction that would have been planted in sugar. I've seen figures where 30% of the land was used for sugar, 30% was used to produce fodder for the animals, 30% was left fallow and to produce provisions. That would make a little bit more sense. You'll find later on that this plantation is 120 acres. So that means probably about 30% of, well, 33%. It's a third, a third, a third. Let's say 30%. 30% of 120 acres is 36 acres. So in the time of slavery, the output of this mill would probably have been very small. If it's 36 acres, I think you might get probably less than 30 tons an acre. Maybe say 20 tons an acre. It's St. John, good soil, but the varieties are not there. So maybe 10 to, I would say even between 10 and 20 tons an acre of sugar. A tenth of that of sugar cane. So if you say that, if that was the case, then you've got like 36 acres multiplied by 10 is 360, multiplied by 20 is 720. So about 500 tons of sugar cane the plantation produced. A tenth of that, modern, in the 50s and 60s, I believe, they got one tenth of the tonnage of cane converted to sugar. So that estimate of 20 to 40 tons is not way off because if you take 500 tons of cane and you work with a tenth, that's 50, it might be less. So I'm pleased with that estimate. The point is, the output of the sugar industry was limited by the milling capacity during slavery. The number of slaves was irrelevant up to a certain point. So if in 1680 there were 40,000 slaves, and in 1817 there were roughly 80,000 slaves, both produced the same amount of sugar. But If sugar was not the only part of the economy, they were employed elsewhere in trade. If 30% of the land is fallow and left to grow provision and whatnot, there's weeding, forking, hoeing, all sorts of things going on. So that's probably where most of the labor was concentrated. Because once sugarcane gets going, you don't have to worry about weeds, and it also keeps the trash that you get after the first harvest is going to keep the moisture in the land for longer. So the sugar cane actually was probably more important than sugar because that was used as a cover crop to keep down weeds and keep moisture in the land. So here's another picture. She wrote the article in 1985. Here's a picture of the house, substantial. Blockstone probably came from the quarry where the vault is. Here are the references she used, she quotes is using. She did a Greenwich genealogy. So, good chance is that this article and the Greenwich genealogy will be lodged with the Department of Archives. Maybe Richard got it from there. Wherever he got it from, he got it. So, she got the information from her husband, from herself, from her husband's brother, Edward Haynes, and from the Journal of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. It describes her husband's early life here. He has a clear memory of every inch of the house and of the plantation and every tree, as you will see. The plantation was 120 acres. That's probably not arable. Um, Probably a lot less than that was arable. And you'll see that there are 9 fields. It produced less sugar cane per acre than Victoria did, which was his father's other plantation of equal size. So Victoria and Haynes Hill were of similar size, but they're not large plantations. The larger plantations, the largest would probably be Kendall at 6 or 7. Draxall is 600 plus acres. Kendall is in that area too. They would be the two largest. There's a one that's even larger than that, but most of that is Rabland, and that would be Walker's in St Andrew. She describes the house. She reckons it was built 300 years ago. I agree with her. She describes the roof and the parapet to protect from hurricanes, the rainwater collection into a tank. I've seen all of this before in other plantation houses. I've seen the tank actually lined with copper, so it heats the water during the day. So if you're going to take a shower or a bath, I guess it didn't have showers then. Um, Water would be nice and tepid. Talks about her husband finding dust under the in the attic, and his father telling him that's dust from Montpellier. Montpellier went in 1902, the year of the birth of her husband. But the dust could also have been there from the eruption of Soufriere in 1812, because the house has been there for 300 plus years. Talks with the gallery. Um, appointed. Talks with hurricanes. Talks with the rooms inside. High ceilings, typical of one of these old plantation houses. The fear, the food. And then she talks about the staff. You have an upstairs. She had, or at least he remembers, an upstairs maid, a downstairs maid, a cook, a housekeeper, and a laundress. And you'll see also there's a coachman. In the 1900s, prior to World, that the price of sugar was high, was during World War One. It was low throughout, and in the 20s and 30s it was falling. The population was really too big for Barbados. There was not enough work to go around. So people worked for a pittance. And that's how you see that there's so much labor in the house. Husband remembers outside, um, talks with a flower garden, and then he starts to, or they start to list off the trees that were there: bananas, fig bananas, plantains, and so on. Whole sets of other trees: casuarina, calabash, almond, yeah, flamboyant, and so on. Even more rubber trees, mahogany trees. Then there were the pens for the mules and the oxen, and a stable for horses. He describes sugar cane was brought to the mill. Watchman lived on site. Animals, dogs, cats. Then she gets to the mill, northern corner of the front porch. Then she deals with sugar. There were 19 fields with such names as Marshall Door, Barker Yard, Dove Spot, and Gull Pond. If you look at the location of Fort and Sweet, you will see that family there, Marshall, very close by. So how that name was chosen was probably because of the neighbor. So Marshall's door opened onto the field, so they were close neighbors. Talks about the planting, and then the production of sugar after milling. She starts to talk with a few people from the 1800s. So talks about her husband's great great aunt, as you will see. She is an interesting character, and she talks about the fact that the house was once the home of Sir Robert Boucher Clarke, the first Chief Justice of Barbados. Prince Alfred, the 17-year-old son of Queen Victoria, was entertained there in 1861. He planted 4 palm trees. He also was taken to see the view from Hackleton's Cliff. He probably stood on the vault that was built probably in 1685 by the Foster family. That vault is quite different from the one at Payne's Hill. It's not dug into the, it's not carved out of the rock. It's actually built with bricks. Or on the history, then she gets to the Chase Mystery Vault of Barbados and the husband, great, great, great aunt, who went in the vault and whose coffin moved. You may not realize this, but the Chase Vault was originally built by a Quaker, built by Richard Elliot in 1703. He asked to be buried in his vault. I'll embellish this a little bit. In the dead of night, at night, which is strange, but interesting. It goes well with the Chase Vault mystery. So he's in there from 1703. His son gets put in there in 1724. It is clear from the 1703 will of Richard Elliot that he was a Quaker. However, his son, if you read the tablet that was taken from the vault, you will, and it's at the front door of Christ Church, Parish Church, you will see the son could not have been a Quaker. Quakers usually buried themselves, were buried simply with no more than date of birth and date of death, or no headstone. If you walk around the burying ground or the cemetery of Christ Church Parish Church, you will see a lot of vaults with no names on them. Those are almost certainly Quaker family vaults. No way to know who, unless somebody were to open them, and there's no need to open them. So it's as though the Quakers were, if you actually go and look for their for evidence of their existence. Here's an interesting one. This is a story about the carriage that used to drive up to the front door, never seen. People would go out to look and see, and there was nothing. My aunt used to tell me that story in, I would guess, the 1960s. So it was probably a part of Barbadian folklore for a long, long time. It's a bit more about the plantation and introduces the vault. Insists that her husband saw Mary Culpeper, obit 1711, on a board on the vault. And somehow it disappeared. A marble tablet or plaque was what was left. So he was surprised to see this. This is what's written on the marble tablet. Wife Ursula first, 1700, and then in 1711. Ursula was the daughter of a man, their name of Hayat. We know they married Ursula and Samuel sometime in 1679 or 1680 because there is the marriage settlement filed, or should be marriage settlement, filed in the archives, it's referred to in his will. So nobody else in his family, in her husband's family, remembered the name or the coffin. So as time went by, there starts to talk about Mary Culpeper, what he saw when he was young. Here it goes. So there was a Mary Culpeper in the vault. There was a coffin, and in fact there were two or three others. I'm going to show you that this Mary Culpeper is probably involved in or interred in the vault in 1832. I think I found the reference to the burial in the St. John's Register. So between 1700, when the first inhabitant went in, and 1832, the vault was in use. So there should be plenty coffins in there, but there aren't. There are actually none today. None from the time of Richard Goddard. But there, as you will see, there are a couple of bones on the floor, which would suggest that there were humans buried in there. Just when it was despairing of not finding a record for a Mary Culpeper burial at Haynes Hill in the vault, this pops up. Mary Culpeper, 1832. She's she lived in St. George. November the 7th, 1832, she was put in the Haynes Hill vault. That's probably the Mary Culpeper from 1832 that appeared in the vault, which Francis Greenwich remembered. She was 79 years old, born in 1753. So Quakers are still present in the island around that time, although not a lot. So she is probably a relative of Samuel Forte's descendants somewhere along the line. This is an example of either a Quaker or a relative of a family who owns a vault asking to be placed there. At the time, the plantation was owned by, I think it's Robert James Haynes. He had somehow acquired it, I would say, in the early 1800s because Baralier has him owning Haynes Hill in 1823. There's no record in Kerry to show when the change in ownership happened. There you go. Always find something new and surprising. This is the will of Samuel Forte, gentleman, as appears on his vault. He wrote it in 1711. It's proved January 1712. So you expect that he died somewhere between October and January 1711, hence 1711 on the marble plaque. His wife is Elizabeth Forte. We have a little information on her, where she comes from and who was her father. For the moment, let's concentrate on what's in here. Obviously, they're very good, if not friends with, acquaintances of the Honourable Christopher Codrington, who we know, let's see, 1711, was a Quaker. I think he died by then. He has a son called Samuel. Now, you see this? The children of son Samuel, except his son Samuel. So you have a son and a grandson. So what Samuel Ford is saying to the world is the children of his son, all his grandchildren, except for Samuel, is dealt with in this clause. He has a daughter, Ursula, named after her mother, Ursula Fort, who died in 1700. She married John Todd, Todd's plantation. There she is, wife of John Todd. The children of daughter Thomason Leslie, the wife of William Leslie. So that's another family producing grandchildren for him. The children of Frances Cullimore, widow, except for Robert Cullimore. So he's made an exception of Robert, Catherine, and Thomasine Cullimore. So he's left, it looks like he probably left these three grandchildren out of his will. All the grandsons will inherit at 18, except for the grandson Robert Cullimore, who will inherit at 21. Money drew me from the estate of his father, William Cullimore, deceased. So Robert Cullimore's father, William Cullimore, who would have been Frances Cullimore's husband, died owing money. Now look here. My vault or burial place in my plantation to be kept in repair. There you go. That's the vault we just looked at. It's cut into the rock, and the stone probably was used to build the house. So he's done pretty well for himself by 1711. He bought part of the plantation in 1697 and ends up with the whole thing by the time he dies. He named a friend who is also an old acquaintance. So you see the difference between friend and acquaintance. It's pretty plain there. The executor of the will is his son Samuel Fort. He signs it Samuel Fort. So the witnesses there are Michael Doughty, it looks like, John Lewis, and Christopher Gore. Now this page, we go look at the same thing, has in Foster, no friends mentioned, Foussier, no friends mentioned, Frank, here he mentions friends, Joseph Gamble, Henry Ellicott. And you see again, 1/3 of my estate. Yeah, Mary Cole, who is some relative of his, or some friend of his, gets 1/3. and the other 2/3 are for the use and benefit of the poor among friends. So, in other words, Quakers are poor. They're also rich too. Then it's Franklin, Gene Franklin. No sign of a friend here. So we got two names out of one, two, three, four, five names. What, 40%? Um, we were getting better before in volume one. This is volume three. So let's look down at the bottom. Page 125 of volume three of the Wills and Administrations. This is by Joanne McCrea Saunders. So that's what the will of Samuel Forte looks like. Oh, we've seen that Samuel Forte built his vault around 1700, probably when he was building his house, maybe slightly after. There's a burial of Mary Culpeper in the vault at Haynes Hill in 1832. The vault was in use in the period 1700 when the first inhabitant was placed there for 132 years at least. The Culpeper family I found was Quaker. So what we're going to do next is to explore some of the work that Richard Goddard did with the Mayor's Culpeper Vault at Easy Hall. There were a series of burials that came to light. The earliest being 1795, and the latest being in the early 1900s. In fact, one of the persons who attended the recommittal after Richard had finished his work, or Richard and his group had finished their work, actually remembers being present at a funeral where a, where a, all he could remember was a female was interred. So we can look from the list of what Richard found and published and infer what the name of that female was and perhaps what her links were to the Mears and Culpeper family. Hope you enjoyed this. Deal with Mears Culpeper vaults next.